Hello and welcome to Pagabo Live, our initiative designed to promote knowledge in the public sector. My name's Tom, and over the next hour, we'll be reacting to last week's budget with our panel of industry experts, who I'll ask them to introduce themselves now, starting with Aman.
Hi, thanks, Tom. Aman Bergen, Deputy Group CEO at Pagabo Group.
Next up, Jonathan.
Hello all, I'm Jonathan Holyoke. I'm the Policy Director at Atkins Realis.
And last but by no means least, David.
Afternoon, everybody. David Atkinson, Group Head of Development and Land for Wilmot Dixon.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much to all three of you for joining today. Today's event is a panel discussion where we'll react to those headline announcements from the autumn budget and discuss how they'll shape the industry in 2026 and beyond. And we'll also be taking a look at the renewed importance of public-private partnerships. We'd also love it if you could all get involved, so please feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like using the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Depending on what version of Zoom you're on, it might be hidden behind the more options, but yeah, feel free to submit any questions for our panel throughout the session today. We'll also be running our usual polls during the session to gauge everyone's level of understanding and engagement with the topics that we're discussing. And in fact, the first poll is up on screen now. So if that could be fired up, because we're asking, as we do at the start of every session, how aware are you of the key changes facing the public sector following the delivery of the autumn budget? So what we'll also do for those new to Pagabo Live is we'll ask this question again at the end, and hopefully we'll see that you've all improved your knowledge and our panel's done their job today. So if we could wrap that poll up now, please. So interestingly, nobody has responded to say that they're very aware of the key changes to the public sector for the budget. So some work to do there for our panel, but a good starting point for us. And we'll go then on to our first question, and it's quite an open one. We're going to go to Aman first on this one, but we'll hear from all three of you on your top takeaways from this year's autumn budget.
Well, I think first I'll start with it was a very eventful budget, and definitely the run up to the budget was shrouded in lots of controversy and commentary. But I think my sort of big takeaway was, despite all the build up and the noise around it, actually not that much has changed. I think if I stand back, tax rises around individuals were, whether it's changes to pensions, etc., have kind of been back weighted towards the back end of the period, back end of 29, 28, 29. Not much has changed. I think my key takeaway was actually the increased level of investment, certainly around kind of construction infrastructure that was put forward. I think we're at 2.7% of overall GDP in terms of public sector net investment is sustained, and there are pockets of actual acceleration. So I think my key takeaway was there's not cuts, and actually we're sort of slightly accelerating investment, certainly a strong focus around certain areas, so healthcare, education, justice, defence, and sort of decarbonisation were the kind of key themes for me. So my key takeaway was, despite all the noise, actually the sort of bad news from a individual taxation point of view comes in a couple of years' time, and actually the government are trying to accelerate and deploy capital slightly faster, if not, certainly in line with where we were in the spring. So sort of net positive, despite all the commentary, is probably my key takeaway.
David, does that tally with your view on the key takeaways?
Yeah, it does. I think that it feels as though the budget was sort of evolution rather than revolution, I guess. It's great to see those sustained levels of public investment into capital works. It gives us a more sort of stable platform to build from and to grow our business and opportunity into, which is helpful, and it sets the kind of foundations for stability to make those sorts of investment decisions. I think I was also quite encouraged by some of the language in the budget, and also from the sort of spring statement. We're seeing that re-emergence of PPPs as a model for delivery of public infrastructure, particularly in the healthcare and also the decarbonisation sector, and you hear murmurings about it in other sectors as well. So it'd be interesting if we can kind of dust off some of the negative views that people have of PFI and then actually look at how PPPs in a new form can be used to deliver capital works going forward. I think it's positive, and also positive to see sort of that certainly from a development point of view, the 39 billion which was allocated for affordable housing has been left untouched and actually is there to be able to support housing growth going forward, because clearly the use of that grant funding over the next few years is going to be increasingly important in delivering the housing numbers which are needed.
Yeah, thanks, David, and we'll definitely touch on PPPs a little more later on. Jonathan, in our sort of prep for this, one of the things that you pointed out is that there wasn't necessarily too much new in the budget this time around. A lot of it was kind of re-announcements. So what were your key sort of top takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I think for our business, the real action was at the comprehensive spending review. And as both David and Man has said, that actually there's something really valuable about, retaining, that investment that's come through the capital budget staying untouched. So that kind of feels like, given the noise we were hearing before the budget, that feels quite important actually. And we should, also recognise that it comes with some responsibilities for industry as well. That the government has got a sort of stagnating growth number of 1.5%, which it will hope to outperform in the next few years to try and deal with some of the pain that Aman has said is coming. So it's kind of on us really to sort of help them deliver at the sort of pace that they need to in order to show some meaningful visible change to the country and the sort of grumpy voters that are out there. So, I think lots to do, and the government's done part of the job by giving us the opportunity and giving the investment, but there's plenty more to go at. That's the first point. I mean, the second point for me is the politics. I think around the budget were pretty clear. She needed to shore up her base, hence the welfare kind of gifts, if you like, the two-child welfare part of it, and also shore up the bond market, hence the tax rises. So you kind of feel like she's done the immediate short-term stuff and perhaps hasn't done so much for business and for growth in terms of additional investment in the longer term. There are bits and pieces, and I think the other trend that we should probably pick up in conversation is how much of the bets are being placed on the different combined authorities and the mayors to actually deliver a lot of this change as well. So there's a strong regional flavour to this budget too. That was a trend that was there before, but I think has come through quite strongly as well. So those are the things that felt important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Something we'll touch on a little later on in this edition of Pagabo Live. We'll go to the next question now, which is around the areas of public sector activity that are likely to feel the most impact from last week's announcement. We'll go to you first on this one, David, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I sort of touched on it, but we're seeing that re-emergence of PPPs in the healthcare sector, I think, is particularly important for us. And I think there is a real opportunity there to come up with a new model that drives growth in that sector and which can be replicated elsewhere and sets a bit of a precedent for privately funded development. I also, the housing comment that I made previously as well is increasingly important, seeing how that grant's deployed. What we're seeing alongside that is some of that, or an awful lot of that grant, being deployed to the mayors and being devolved out to them for delivery. And that's quite a new thing. So actually the sort of Mayor of Greater Manchester taking responsibility for affordable homes grant within Greater Manchester. So you look at that and you think, well, actually that's impacting housing delivery, it's impacting devolution. These are really sort of positive changes. But the devil is always in the detail, and actually working out what the sort of grant process, what the process for accessing that sort of funding would look like. It still needs to be worked through. We still need to sort of resolve the detail on it. But I am starting to see the impact of that. And it is starting to sort of impact the sorts and types of conversations we have across the business and who we target. And then just generally the level of sort of consistency in some of the other capital works programs is very welcome.
And Jonathan, from your perspective, what are the areas that you feel are most likely to be feeling the impact?
Yeah, so I agree with David about housing. It feels like that's the place where you could probably move the dial most quickly. So I completely agree, and I completely agree about those points about where the action is. Not just in Whitehall, but around the country. So So I get that. I think you could probably sort of put a wider sort of frame around some of that, particularly when you think about sort of regional regeneration schemes as well. So there is often transport elements to some of these big housing developments, and and CRE, all sorts of things that go around them. So just actually packaging up some of these growth packages in the right way to attract private finance, perhaps not just into housing, but into the broader schemes, I think is one of the big challenges. This is maybe not maybe not a new PPP model exactly, but it certainly needs, new skills within the public sector, and a sort of, an interesting, imaginative approach on both sides to bring it all together. So that feels like an opportunity and a challenge that's coming. I mean, there's, at the big sort of scheme end of the spectrum, there's more money for Lower Thames Crossing as well. So there is some extra money going into the big schemes. There's some changes to how green gilts or sort of green financing is done to allow nuclear to sort of play a little bit more, which is, again, I think positive in the long term, particularly for SMRs. Defence was a big winner back in the spending review and remains so. There's 1.5 billion more to spend on releasing surplus defence land. Again, it's a really housing play, but it's kind of interesting that it's coming up in multi sectors as well. So yeah, I mean, there's opportunity in all sorts of pockets, I think, but certainly, I think the government's going to be most interested in, where can we see some progress in the sort of next couple of years, and that's the big challenge I think we need to help them with, and sort of identify those quick wins.
Super great stuff. And Aman, obviously, Pagabo Group, some of the big clients are within that public sector space. So, which areas do you feel are likely to see those impacts the most?
Yeah, I think the guys have covered from a sort of sector point of view. I think, I guess from a personal point of view, it was, there was some commentary and feeling that maybe kind of decarbonisation or kind of green-led investment would kind of move to the right. I think I was positively or certainly pleased in a positive way that there is that commitment towards decarbonisation has been mentioned a couple of times, but sort of general kind of energy net zero transition. It would have been, I think, politically quite an easy one to kind of let drift to the right in terms of the investment. So as we've said a couple of times here, that the sort of net investment is there. I think there's additional power into or additional funding into regional mayors and kind of looking at the whole kind of local government reorganisation is still a key area, and how we actually deploy. But I think increasingly my view is still, local authorities who Pagabo Group has really strong relationships with are still going to be the key agent for deployment and delivery of a lot of the investments. So in some ways it sort of hasn't changed. It's just where the money flows through will slightly differ, but I think we are still going to be heavily reliant on local government to deploy the capital effectively and efficiently. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, where I'm coming at it from.
Yeah, lots of conversations to be had about local government reorganisation over the next few months or so, no doubt. We'll move on to the next section of our webinar today, but first we'll touch in with our second poll of the day. So if you could fire that up now, please. Do you believe the budget provides the right level of support for public sector delivery? So 4 very strongly and 1 not at all. So if you could answer with those, please. And while you're doing that, also bear in mind that you can ask questions of our panel by dropping those in the Q&A box. We'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible at the end of today's session. If you close that poll now, please. So interestingly, the answers are slightly skewed towards the lower end there, in that the budget doesn't necessarily, or our audience doesn't feel that the budget necessarily provides the right level of support for public sector delivery. So quite an interesting finding there, and we can discuss that maybe a little more in this second question that we have, this third question that we have, sorry, around how the budget is shaping that outlook for public sector, the procurement side, and also commercial activity over the next year. Amanda, this seems a perfect thing to go to you on first, please.
Thanks, Tom. So, there's procurement at 23, which obviously came in February. So I think we're still, as a as an industry feeling our way into that with frameworks coming and Pagabo kind of frameworks will really hit the market under 23 next year. But I think if you take the overall shape of the budget, the investment is being front loaded. And I think Jonathan touched on this. The kind of additional tax raises are back ended. Therefore, my summary of that is there is an expectation that we get to work and see the benefits of that investment over the next 2, 3 years. Therefore, I think specifically from a kind of procurement point of view, efficiency and innovation are kind of central. So, how do we get that capital from the Chancellor's budget effectively into shovels on the ground, and how do we do that as efficiently and quickly as possible? And I think for me, and certainly from a Pagabo Group perspective, it's leaning into the expertise, the established framework providers who can bring the right suppliers at the right points to deploy that capital as quickly as possible. Because I think if that strategy, that sort of overall strategy, does not deliver, then I think the reality is the tax rises the shape of that will need to change towards the back end of the decade, and therefore I think we're all vested in getting this capital to work efficiently and as quickly as possible into the right schemes, which will ultimately deliver the increased growth.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And on to you, David. I know Wilmot Dixon have been procured on several major developer-led projects through Pagabo managed frameworks. How do you kind of see that outlook for the procurement and commercial activity over the next year off the back of last week's
I
budget?
can't kind of echo an awful lot of Amanda says, if I'm honest with you. We have a real sort of window of opportunity here to be able to get going on opportunity so that it can be delivered within this Parliament. And actually being able to be innovative, entrepreneurial, creative in terms of the way that we work with the public sector to be able to unlock and deliver projects, whether that be through our developer-led opportunities that we're doing in partnership with Pagabo, or some of the direct construction projects that we're delivering. Actually being able to curtail 6 or 12, 18 months worth of extensive procurement will make the difference between us being able to be on site with those projects and delivering them within this Parliament, or them tipping over into the next Parliament. We operate in the built environment sector, and we all know the sort of period that these particular projects take to move from sort of initial plans through to delivery. So anything that can be done to accelerate that, I think, is to be welcome. And the increasing sort of mood music we hear across the public sector is that the organisations, the individuals who are taking projects to Treasury or to central government for funding are finding that if they are shovel ready and able to get them onto site, then they're more likely to be to benefit from the availability of that funding.
Excellent stuff, David. And Jonathan, just to wrap this question up from a consultant's perspective, what are you seeing as the outlook in that procurement and commercial activity space?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. It's really all about pace and getting moving as quickly as possible. The government's kind of done a lot of the policy work, so now it's about the practical delivery. There was one small thing in the budget I didn't spot actually myself, but came through a CBI briefing. But every department now has a procurement innovation champion sort of in it. There's an innovation marketplace within central government at least as well. So there are sort of things going on. I guess the risk is that there's a bit of wheel reinvention that goes on if you're not careful. But hopefully, if you're, I guess, Pagabo, what you'll want to see is, better use of, the existing frameworks can deliver the pace that's coming through. So, it's great that people are innovating, and it's hopefully a signal that, they want to pull every lever in order to move as quickly as possible. But, we clearly just need that to start happening and, really go from business case to actual kind of construction as quickly as possible. we kind of did a survey of private finance investors about a month ago, and so many projects are falling down because the business case wasn't holding up, both on the investor side and on the government side. So there's something about moving beyond the business case, in the right value for money kind of assessed way as quickly as possible and getting projects going. I think that's the core of it.
Absolutely. Answering the viability question is front and center of everybody's mind. We'll stick with you on this next one, actually, Jonathan, to go first on this. So, have any of the changes to these kind of fiscal rules and funding models that we've seen in the autumn budget created new opportunities for public sector organisations?
Um, well, I think there's loads of opportunity, particularly in the combined authorities. So when you go to the regions, the changes to the Green Book and the greater sort of value being placed on sort of regional growth, I think is really important, and hopefully will allow more of these big combined authority schemes to get over the line and to blend. They're going to have to blend in different types of finance to get moving. You're going to have to use a national wealth fund. They're going to have to use private finance and some of these new funds that have been allocated through the budget. So I think it's a really important opportunity there that you kind of use some of the kind of changes to government accounting to unlock projects, to get the business cases, as I say, over the line and moving forward. Those feel like pretty fundamental kind of opportunities to me. I mean, the other things that feel like they could and should move quickly. Again, it is that affordable housing space feels right. The new National Housing Bank feels like a really important catalyst for quick growth as well. So really, I mean, and there's a risk in that because not some of these organisations haven't been set up yet, but getting through the sort of setup phase quickly and actually getting money distributed is going to be really important. But it is a significant opportunity. So I'd put those two top of my list.
And David, from your perspective, obviously in terms of the role that you play at Wilmot Dixon, there's an element there of that devolution, as Jonathan mentioned, been really important, but also things around planning reform and the
Yeah, look,
policies toward grey belt.
it is, I think, universal in terms of across the sector. The changes which are coming forward with regards to planning are positive. It's great to see the rhetoric. It's great to see what feels like the government sort of really putting some backing behind reforming the planning system. And that's really welcome. It's good to see. And that's not just some of the changes to housing targets that were set out last year. It's some of the announcements that we've seen over the last couple of months, whether it be some of the London-specific design guidance, etc., being changed to enable delivery within London, some of the commentary around sort of default yes for development near to railway stations. All those sorts of things are really encouraging. I think set the scene for organisations like ours to begin to invest again in planning and development in some of those spaces, which is good. That being said, it's still sort of contrasted with particularly in the resi space, some very marginal viability on those projects, caused by sort of changes, increases in regulation, which has increased delivery cost, and actually values and rents haven't necessarily kept up with the pace of those changes. So, housing delivery in particular is a system. It's nice to see that the planning part of that system is starting to potentially turn again, but the viability part of the system is perhaps still a little bit clogged up, and it would be good to find ways to be able to unlock that going forward.
And the man, any thoughts from you on this one?
No, I think to echo what the guys said, really, it's around kind of planning reform and locking housing. It all comes back to, again, speed of deployment, speed of delivery. How do we unlock the value through devolved kind of capital budgets? How do we bring private capital in, notwithstanding the sort of viability? I think it's doubling down on private capital. It's accelerating delivery and deployment. Is kind of the summary there.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, all three of you, for your answers on that one. We're going to move on to our next poll, and we're around halfway through this week's edition of Pagabo Live. So, how optimistic are you about access to funding or investment opportunities following the autumn budget? This is going to be a really interesting response to see, given that around 50% of attendees were less than pleased with the levels of support for the public sector that were announced in the autumn budget. So a couple more seconds on that one, please. So 1 being not optimistic at all, and 4 being very optimistic. I think if it matches up with the last question, we're going to see a few towards the lower end here. So if you could close that poll now, please. And yep, as expected, doing my quick maths on that, around 85+% of those answering are saying that they're not especially optimistic about the access to funding or investment opportunities following the autumn budget. So clearly still a little bit of work there to do for Rachel Reeves and her team in terms of getting the public sector on side with some of the proposals in the budget. We'll move on to the next question now, which is what does the budget mean for the construction and infrastructure pipeline? And has there been enough clarity provided for long-term planning? We'll go to you first on this one, David, please.
Yeah, thank you. Let's take the positives. So the positives are that sustained forward look in terms of infrastructure and actually being able to articulate what the pipeline would look like. And as we mentioned at the sort of top of the webinar, having a sustained level of investment into capital works over the next few years it is really helpful. That sets the foundations for us to be able to invest in growth and development of around those opportunities. So that's to be welcome. There remains in the construction industry a real challenge around skills and getting the people who are available, competent, capable of delivering those projects. And with that sort of acceleration in terms of the pipeline, I know there has been some funding that's been allocated towards improving construction skills, but that takes a while to work through the system. And I think we need to be turning up the dial a little bit sooner to be able to bring the resource in to be able to deliver those projects efficiently over the next few years.
And good to hear from you on this one, Aman, as well. What are your views on whether enough clarity has been provided for that long-term planning pipeline?
I think the sort of coming back to the fact that this is now kind of two budgets in concurrently where the investment's been reaffirmed and sort of we've got the multi-year view of capital budgets out for the next 4 or 5 years. Look, I think inevitably that provides stability, that provides the ability for the industry to plan. I think, does it provide enough clarity? I think there's more clarity, specific projects that Jonathan mentioned, Lower Thames Crossing. There's specific kind of funding pockets around different transportation systems being kind of called out. So I think that provides a level of clarity. I think exactly where all the funding goes into the projects, I don't think is clear enough. But I think there is a commitment on the national infrastructure and construction pipeline being updated. I think it's on a quarterly basis on a go forward. So I think the stability, the fact the investment's been reaffirmed allows the industry to plan. Whether there's a 3-4 year timeline is enough time is a slightly different question. But I think there's a decent amount of clarity being provided at this point.
Jonathan, a case of slowly but surely we're getting there with it.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit more positive really than that, because I mean, industry always wants more clarity, more pipeline visibility, more certainty. But if you sort of take a step back a couple of years, and if we were given this 2 years ago, we'd have definitely taken it. The work that Becky Wood has done with NISTA in terms of providing a pipeline that you can actually see and risk assess for yourself. That's exactly what we've been asking for years. So I think I'm pretty positive. I feel like there are things to do. That the pipeline that NISTA has produced is about 780 billion. I think only less than half of it is coming from public money. So there's a big question about whether we can attract the private sector investment that is needed to sort of bridge and actually complete projects. And lots and lots of hard work needed to do that. But the opportunity now is to get after it, I think, and see if we can make it all happen, because the policies pretty much in place. We've moved a lot of the barriers out of the planning system that have been snaring things up. So I think broadly speaking, it's now kind of on us to sort of, bring the projects to market and actually make it happen. So, I'm probably maybe a bit more positive than the sentiment in the audience on that one. But the other side of the coin is, the capacity that's required within the system in order to make it happen is clearly a sort of a question. And that point about lag, I think that David, you mentioned in the construction sector, it kind of applies to the public sector as well. So it's brilliant to bring in 350 new planners, through the budget, but where they're coming from, how you recruit them, how you get them moving quickly enough is, you're definitely going to lose 6 months, but you've got to move as quickly as you possibly can to sort of support the systems and move quickly. So but overall, glass half full.
Excellent. Well, with the reference there to NISTA, and we've talked about public-private partnerships intermittently throughout today's webinar, but we'll go on to a question about them now, and we'll go to you on this one first, David. So, how can public sector organisations strengthen those public-private partnerships and make the regions more attractive to investors and developers in the light of the budget?
Yeah, look, we found that there has been, certainly in the development space, I guess, an evolution in terms of the way a lot of, particularly local authorities, but also the sort of combined authorities are approaching development regeneration in their spaces. And that's moving away from sort of single site development into sort of programmatic approaches where a town or a place might package up a number of sites, number of opportunities, and actually create something that offers the opportunity for the private sector to work in partnership with the public sector, maybe on a flexible basis, to deliver a range of schemes which deliver not just the buildings, but also the social outcomes that are needed in a place to be able to transform it. And for us, that becomes a more attractive proposition because it demonstrates a kind of longer term relationship, which is a sort of thing that we're keen to invest in, rather than a short term transactional relationship with an authority. It allows us to build those deeper bonds with a particular community, invest in a place, and also then have more meaningful conversations with the institutional investors who we will introduce to a place, because actually we can talk to them also about a programmatic approach to development and delivery of schemes in a particular area, rather than just sort of taking forward a particular site or project. So for me, it feels as though thinking bigger and thinking on a longer term programmatic approach is what we've seen has tended to pay dividends over the last couple of years in terms of getting that growth in public-private partnerships in the regen space.
Thanks, David. And Jonathan, your view on this, please.
Yeah, we're quite active in this space. I think it's a really interesting challenge. I mean, our biggest shareholders are Canadian pension funds, so we have a kind of, we can feel their perspective a little bit as we go through some of this. And I really agree. I mean, it feels like it's a challenge about sort of blending assets in the right way to create, strong investable propositions with, revenue streams that will work over a period of time. It's probably about not getting too obsessed about balance sheet treatment in the short term, but thinking about how it can evolve over the long term to sort of give the kind of wins that people need on both sides. And then, well, Newtowns is a great example, isn't it? Can you deliver, a replicable, scalable kind of solution which people can invest in, understand and invest in, see a return from, and that can actually move through quickly. So you can actually have a model which can, move from Newtown to Newtown to sort of, these sort of clusters of asset types, and actually that will be helpful for pension funds who are investing in up to sort of £500 million chunks, rather than smaller numbers. I think it kind of is probably, that's where the opportunity is really. And I think, David, I'm really just saying the same as you about that need for scale, pace, and replicability.
Yeah, and Aman, that sort of programmatic approach that David and Jonathan have alluded to there obviously works quite neatly with the way Pagabo likes to approach things. So, your views on this, please.
Yeah, I think it's also thinking about increasingly, as local authorities want to access capital from private funding, it's also going to become really competitive between the authorities themselves, because there's only so many providers of institutional capital out there now. There's lots to deploy. Viability we've kind of talked about, but I guess I would encourage people to really plan ahead and make sure they're really thinking about the sort of go-to-market, as we talk about in the sort of more private sector-led businesses. But how are you attracting? So it's not just the schemes themselves, but also how you're going to market in terms of articulation of the opportunity. Are you getting to the right people early enough? So that's probably one consideration. I think those where certainly Pagabo has been involved in this, have seen them kind of bringing prospectuses to market, which is probably a slightly different way of channeling that interest in to attract that institutional capital, but also how well aligned and how well aligned can you get within the authorities' kind of planning and then the kind of regeneration sides of it. So where we've seen it working really well is where you've got strong local alignment between the departments who can go to market as a sort of single entity, and that's really attractive to institutional investors at this time.
Thank you, guys. Well, great insights as always. We're going to move on to the final section of today's webinar after this most recent poll. So, how confident are you that the construction and built environment workforce can meet the upcoming demand? We talked a little bit about the skills shortage and the challenges that are faced there earlier on in the webinar. But how confident are you that the construction and built environment workforce can meet the upcoming demand? I feel like there's a bit of a trend here because I can imagine this is going to be quite a negative response as well, given what we've already discussed previously. But one, not very confident at all, and four, very confident. We can bring that up now and close the poll. Probably more positive than I was expecting there. So around 89% are in that 2 to 3 sort of middle ground of confidence. But encouraging to see around 40% of today's audience have said that they're reasonably confident that the workforce can meet that upcoming demand. Maybe something we can talk about in one of our upcoming questions. But we'll stay with you, Aman, to answer this next one. So, do public bodies have that workforce and supply chain capacity needed to deliver against the lofty ambitions from the budget and also the Labour Party's manifesto from the general election?
Well, I think we've touched on skills shortages in the construction sector. I don't think that is a new thing. I don't think that's kind of going away quickly. I think to the extent kind of off-site manufacturing can mitigate some of that, possibly don't know. So one view is there is a capacity gap, and there was some. Or there is some additional funding, as David talked to fill that, how quickly that can fill. But also it's about planning the cadence of, there's only so much capacity to deliver, but actually going back to that point about clarity and certainty, well, I think if we're at capacity for the next 4 years, I think we'll get through more than we think in terms of the schemes that are available. I think it's the lack of clarity, the kind of time it takes for projects to get to kind of the shovel in the ground, which is, I think, where more of the time is burnt. So the quicker we can, so we've provided the clarity, the quicker we can deliver and deploy, I think it then makes good use of the capacity we've got, allowing more to come on stream, through the funding and the initiatives that have been launched. So I'm probably more positive, probably more in line with the audience in terms, and we're probably more resilient than we give credit for in terms of our ability to react and ultimately deliver great schemes.
And Jonathan, as Aman said, it's not a problem that's going away particularly quickly, but I guess the longer build programs in the very nature of some of these major projects helped with that.
Yeah. Obviously, having a sort of a long-term view allows you to sort of invest in the people you're going to need to deliver it, and the more confidence you have in that pipeline, the more you'll do that. So that all feels, and like I said before, I think we're in a decent place actually on that front. Also, we're members of the Construction Leadership Council, and there's a kind of strong feeling there that yes, there are challenges and bottlenecks in the supply chain, but broadly speaking, if the work is there, we will find a way to get it done. So I think there's that a man's sort of point about positivity, I think, is quite an important one. We quite often talk ourselves down in this sector, but actually, when we really kind of can see a project, we can get it done, we can normally find a way to resource it sensibly. So I feel like the supply chain will come through. We've talked a bit about some of the sort of soft spots that might be in public bodies themselves to sort of enable that, which is a real challenge, I think, and we should be sort of empathetic, from outside, given some of the sort of resource cuts that departments and public bodies are having to deal with as they go through this process. So it's not easy, but yes, overall, I feel like we can get it done, and I think we've got the right sort of outlook to do that. And we just need to sort of get on with it, really.
David, I can see you nodding along there. Something
No,
clear ties with you.
I agree. I think we as an industry, yes, there are challenges, but we will find ways to overcome it, whether that's through trading, MMC, finding more efficient ways of delivering projects. I don't doubt that at all. But I think it's worthwhile also having one eye on the public sector and their resource, because ultimately they are the sort of gatekeepers, project managers of an awful lot of these projects, making sure that the individuals there are supported and enabled to be able to give us the guidance and instructions that we need to be able to deliver those schemes is incredibly important. And we stand ready as an industry to be able to support them in doing that, or whether that's on a sort of personal level with relationships and support that we offer, or on a more sort of corporate level in terms of framework routes, etc., that might allow them to kind of develop more efficient processes. So I think we've got to be smart around the way that we work and the way that we achieve it, but I'm sure we'll rise to the challenge.
Excellent. Good positivity on the panel today. Something we always like to see and hear. We'll talk now a little bit about social value, something that regularly comes up in our Pagabo live conversations, and how can public sector organisations continue to maximise social value while responding to these priorities and also the constraints that have been dropped in by this most recent budget. David, we'll stick with you on this one.
Yeah, no, I'm going to go back to a theme from earlier, really, in terms of programmatic approaches and longer term delivery arrangements. Moving away from structures which are very transactional and one-off, where sort of organisations bid tender to deliver a single project. It can be a struggle with those sorts of schemes to be able to deliver some really meaningful, impactful social value and change in a place over the long term. But where the public sector is prepared to work in partnership over a wider area on a number of schemes over the longer term, it really does give the ability for us to invest in social value, sustainability into a place above and beyond what we could do just as a single project. So, I would always be keen on working with customers who are sort of share those longer term aspirations, because it just allows us to position all of that support that we can offer and deliver some really meaningful outcomes over 5 or 10 years rather than some quick wins on a one-off project.
Yeah, and the social value, something that's very much at the heart of what Pagabo help deliver. So how do you see how whether organisations can continue to kind of maximise it given the news from the budget?
I think there's kind of nothing in the budget for specifically that I think prohibits or impinges that anyone's ability. It's really about focusing on the outcomes, and I don't think it's necessarily budget specific, but getting the right balance between and really focusing on the outcomes for local areas. Using data and some of the technology and tools that are increasingly available to target the schemes and making sure they are maximising the outcomes for the communities in which they're being built. Leveraging local supply chains and just doubling down on that. I think we've touched on it a few times, and I'll pull on it again here. But the certainty just in any space allows those who are making investments to make the commitments, and I don't see it being a choice of social value and or priorities or constraints. I think we've got to really focus on outcomes, and keep challenging ourselves as a sector and industry about our definition of kind of value for money. And I think the more we focus on outcomes, the more we will deliver social value as part of delivering the overall kind of spending and infrastructure that's been envisaged. I think we're investing, or the government are investing, in the hope that it drives jobs, it drives productivity, it drives overall GDP growth. Therefore, there's an assumption that it is about place and it is about outcomes. You'll get some benefit through the jobs that are created in the delivery, but it's also what happens beyond the delivery for me. So I don't see them being separate topics. I think we've got to continue to prioritise both.
Yeah, and Jonathan, that outcomes-based approach and results is incredibly important, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally is. And this whole space, it's kind of non-negotiable, isn't it? The government's spending a huge amount of money in this space. We need to deliver good social value outcomes for them as we go along. We need to see that sort of positivity, not just, as you say, in the direct employment we do, but in the work we do in communities. And to David's point, the further out you can see, the more you can invest to do that over the long term. So that all makes perfect sense to me. I think if I was sitting in Treasury at the moment, one of the things that would scare me most is that data about youth unemployment, for example. What is it? It's just going up and it feels quite intractable. So, as one example, I think you might well see, the agenda around social value shifting quite a bit more towards employing sort of younger people, perhaps not just as of in the big organizations like ours, where we employ about 1,000 people a year, through our schemes, but actually, through the supply chain a bit further as well. So, you might find the flavour of social value changing a little bit as the world around us changes. But I think in terms of the kind of responsibility to deliver kind of good, meaningful outcomes, that's not going anywhere.
Excellent stuff. Well, let's move on to our final question before we go into our Q&A, and let's talk KPIs and deliverables. So what are those indicators or milestones that we'll be looking at that will help us understand whether the budget is delivering those positive outcomes for the public sector? Jonathan, got to go to the consultant first on this one.
Okay, so I'd have housing delivery pretty close to the top of the list as a really good metric that shows that the system is working, and sort of you better see it on a reasonably quick time frame. So I think that's quite visible. So I think that's important. And behind that, obviously, there'll be sort of planning decisions. There'll be the system needs to be working well for that to be happening, and things like National Housing Bank needs to be in place. So that would be near the top of my list. Clarity on the rules of the game for private finance, I think, is also pretty close to the top of my list. That feels like something that can be moved forward quickly, and starting to then measure how much private money is coming into public infrastructure is, again, a pretty easy thing you can measure to show some sort of signs of delivery. And then probably the third thing is business case approval for these schemes, because they're just lines on a budget at the moment. Actually getting to the point where they're programmatic, real, deliverable, and financed feels like the other thing I'd be measuring. So those are three for me.
There's the top three from Atkins Realis. Let's go Pagabo next. And Aman, what are you thinking are some of the key indicators and milestones we need to be looking for in the as this budget disappears into the rear view?
Yeah, I think Jonathan's kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of the ultimate one is delivery, right? So it's that there's good rhetoric, good intent, but the key metric is delivery. I think to add, we touched on it earlier around kind of regional metrics. So I guess employment, productivity, measurable things, kind of level of private finance to public finance as an overall. Probably just conscious of time. KPIs are close to my heart, and obviously as an organisation, so it could be until next year's budget talking about it. But I think those are the kind of ones I'd pull out in addition to Jonathan's.
Excellent. And to wrap this part of the webinar up, David, we'll get yours as well.
No, I echo what the guys have said. The government have kind of nailed the colours to the mast in terms of housing numbers that they want. That seems like a pretty obvious way to start to score how successful some of the intervention has been. I think we can also take a look back at the infrastructure pipeline that was published this summer, and actually we've got some targets set in there for particular schemes, and let's measure ourselves against them. Let's have a look at in 3 or 4 years' time what's actually been delivered of there, and that will give us something tangible to point to.
Brilliant stuff. Well, thank you very much to the three of you for your contributions so far. We've got a couple of audience questions coming in. Just a reminder that you can get your questions into our panel using the Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your screen, either potentially hiding behind the More menu on the bottom of your Zoom screen, depending on what device you're using. But drop a question there, and we'll be putting it to our experts before the end of today's webinar. But we'll finish off now with our final audience gathering poll. How aware are you now of the key changes facing the public sector following the delivery of the autumn budget? 1 being not very aware, and 4 being very aware. This is the ultimate acid test for whether our panel has done a good job today, as to whether we've seen an improvement there. We're nervously awaiting the results. So if we close that poll now. And the good news is that only one person has said that they're still not very aware of the impact of the budget. So well done to our team there. Around 80% saying that they are at that higher end of awareness. So good work from our panel today. We'll move into our Q&A in just a moment, and just one final poll that's going to pop up on your screen now for those attending, whether you'd like to be in touch with the Pagabo team in your region to follow up for any further information or support on procurement frameworks or upcoming projects. But now it is the time to move on to our Q&A, and we've had a question in from Toyin Davids. We'll go to you first on this one, David, but feel free, Jonathan and Aman, to jump in whether you see fit. How will breaking up projects into lots affect longer term arrangements with public-private partnerships? I guess it goes back to that kind of schematic and programmatic approach that you
Yeah, it does. And the mood music we're hearing around, say, the neighbourhood healthcare centres is that they will be broken up potentially into lots, potentially regionalised. So you have a number of opportunities coming forward within one particular lot. And even then, they will be delivered over a kind of longer term. So that, I think, works for us in terms of actually creating a number of opportunities where we can perhaps look at targeting and delivering something rather than lots of smaller projects or one very large lot that sort of precludes the rest of the market from it. So I think as long as it's managed well, as long as there's a good level of engagement with the market beforehand to understand what would make your kind of lotting structure attractive to them, then for me it feels like the obvious way to go, as long as there's been that engagement before.
Excellent stuff. And one that's a question that we've kind of touched on a little bit throughout and consistently has been devolution and the money going to those devolved combined authorities. We're now a few years into the kind of the devolution and the devolved combined authorities experiment, as it were. I'd be interested just to get an idea from each of the three of you, really, as to whether you feel that the devolution approach has been a net positive in terms of development and in terms of growth in both the public and private sector. Jonathan, I'll go to you first on this one, specifically around the built environment, obviously.
So I guess the answer is yes. We're seeing, lots more sort of energy focus and sort of drive to sort of support particular different regions with their own plans. And I think the way in which the model's been rolled out is, as there's more, you get some more combined authorities with, powers, and you can see, what's going on in Manchester, moving out towards Birmingham, Liverpool, and elsewhere. It kind of feels like it's building up a real head of steam, which I think is helpful. And think, I guess the risk is that everyone does it differently in different places, and you get a sort of, bit of a sort of, dilution of the positive effect if you're not careful. But one of the values of devolution is you shape it for your particular area, and you're going to want to do so you have to sort of accept a little bit of that, but you're going to but also have one eye on the market and the investment you want to attract across different parts of different regions as well, which I think we haven't yet got to the stage where we really have tested that. We've got really interesting examples. The Manchester Good Growth Fund that was announced a couple of weeks ago feels it's £1 billion, but so that feels interesting and positive. And 13 billion in the integrated settlement, so there's loads to go at, there's loads to do. And I think generally the feeling is that the energy and focus that it's created is really positive. So it's a tick from me, I think.
David, is there a risk of there being a bit of a split of the haves and have-nots with those? Obviously, there are areas that will have the devolved government. I know I'm based in the East Midlands, and we have a relatively new combined authority.
Mhm.
But is there that risk of areas that don't have that
I
potentially
think
falling missing out?
there is a concern with that, and the concern is twofold. It's one, I suppose, what happens to those authorities who don't currently have um, a mayor and are going through some form of LGR at the moment. Actually, have you got a world where they are potentially not sort of getting on with maybe the day job in terms of developing and taking projects forward because they're focusing on that regen piece. And I think it's quite important to be able to work with those organisations. Say, actually, look, you know, there's still really good work to be done over the next couple of years, so that you don't fall into that trap. So that's one thing. And then there's also the authorities that are still a little bit left behind on this and further away from it, and actually making sure that we continue to support them and don't just focus all of our attention on Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, the East and West Midlands, and actually identify those other areas where there's still an awful lot of infrastructure that needs to be developed. And maybe some of these national programs from a sort of PPP basis in healthcare, for instance, might start to target some of that.
Excellent. And Aman, any final words from you on this one?
I think there's a sort of regional flavour, but there's also the segmentation of those early adopters, I guess, and really it's about time to delivery, time to deployment. So that the length of time, and I think the guys have touched on, does it create distraction? I think each combined authority is learning from the sort of challenges of the ones that have come before. So I think overall we're becoming a bit more efficient, but I think there is just that variability in terms of the haves and the have-nots, and I think Manchester feels, at high level as a sort of observer, like it's been a success, but it's taken quite a long time to mature the model, and therefore, what does that mean for those who are just coming in, East Midlands and others? Can they accelerate the time to making that success and learn from some of the other authorities? And if they can, then I think generally it will be a really positive thing. If not, then it's going to be quite a long time to deliver it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to all three of you for your contributions today. That's unfortunately all we've got time for with today's Pagabo Live. That was, in fact, our final Pagabo Live of 2025. Yes, we are breaking up for Christmas a couple of weeks early. Don't tell anyone. Where everyone who's signed up for today is now part of the Pagabo Live community, so you will receive a link with all our upcoming sessions for 2026, and also a bit of a roundup of what's happened in 2025. There's going to be a newsletter coming out around a week after every one of our Pagabo Live sessions, which will have a recording of the webinar in video and podcast form, along with further insights from the team. You're also able to claim a CPD credit for today's session. You'll be receiving an email from the Pagabo team on just how you can do that in the coming days. All that's left to be said, thank you very much for your support of Pagabo Live this year and for your attendance today. Thank you very much to Aman, to David, and to Jonathan for their time in preparing for this panel. I know a lot of preparation is going to this from these three guys, and also for their involvement today. So thank you very much to everyone, and we hope to see you all soon next time. Thank you.